flowering leaves of all these life-giving trees that flow in the breeze, giving us the air to breathe, came from the seeds that sons and daughters had sown, passing down histories through stories, genes, and bones. Hear the whispers of the past, dictate your prologue, a generational griot through which memories are prolonged. So we reach down like nourishing waters to seek truths, except we receive nourishment when we're digging the roots.
It's been a long time. We shouldn't have left you without some dope genealogy to step to. What's going on, everybody? It is Tuesday, August 15th. I am Nika Smith, your host here for the next iteration of BlackProGen Live. It's been actually, gosh, probably about a month since the last time you saw all of our smiling faces in front of your TV screen, maybe in front of your computer screen, however it is that you watch us, maybe on your mobile device. And we've missed you. We've missed each other. So we'll probably be having a whole lot of chatter tonight in preparation for the show. So we're just so glad that you could spend your time this evening, especially in this hectic political climate, to take a nice needed mental break and to discuss genealogy from a person of color's point of view. So as I have said again, thank you so much for joining us tonight for this next episode of BlackProGen Live. Of course, with our usual housekeeping, just have to remind you, be sure to tweet us at BlackProGen or hashtag your comments with BlackProGen. And if you're watching tonight's episode and you can't participate in the live chat that's taking place on YouTube, if you're watching on the app, the YouTube app, it's at the bottom of the screen. It says live chat. If you're watching on a computer, it's to the upper top right-hand corner of your screen, which is where the live chat is taking place. Or maybe if you're watching the recording, be sure to tweet us or mention us in your comments, and we'll be sure to get back to you. It's a great way for you to participate in the dialogue that we have on the various issues that we talk about. Tonight's topic is quite a loaded one. Oh, of course, my son is screaming. Isn't this beautiful? Gosh, it's bedtime. We love it. Don't we love it? Gosh, we got to have genealogy because kids are a part of genealogy. Needless to say, genealogy and family history are awesome, but also very personal. What's off limits? What should or shouldn't be public? Join us tonight as we talk and discuss privacy and ethics when it comes to family history and genealogy research, especially within the realm of DNA and the fact that it's such a huge, huge, huge thing in our community right about now. Be sure to get the latest and greatest from BlackProGen in your inbox. Be sure to subscribe to The Lowdown today. Check the description of this recording and any BlackProGen Live episode for the link. And that the Lowdown, some people have asked, it's a shared combined feed of all the content that all the panelists and some friends produce, whether it's blogs, podcasts, and more. And I love getting the Lowdown because sometimes I forget that we are producing so much information. In fact, the last thing that just came through my feed was an amazing post by Shelley Murphy where she just talked about her emotions and feelings with regard to Charlottesville and the fact that she lives there and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to make sure you don't miss what we're producing or putting out into the atmosphere, be sure to subscribe to The Lowdown today. And last but not least, for the reminders, did you know that you can set reminders for our shows? Some people say, gosh, I seem like I missed each episode, or maybe there's a topic I thought I had set a reminder for, but I'm not sure. Be sure to go through to the live streams area of my YouTube profile page, and that will show you all the live streams that we have scheduled through the end of 2017. There have been some changes. Of course, with the announcement of Finding Your Roots, we're actually adding or switching the topics of a couple shows in October and moving them to Wednesday nights so that our genealogy audience has the opportunity to watch the show, and then the next day we can all react and add our 2 cents or 5 cents or whatever we're adding kind of cents in. And so if you've been like, oh shucks, I can't believe I missed that episode, I need reminders, well, be sure to set them. All you need to do is head to my YouTube page, as I mentioned, and click set reminder under the episodes that you're interested in, or simply subscribe to my channel, and every time I go live, you'll get a reminder of when that happens. All right, so without further ado, good evening. I'm Nika Smith, your host. We want to go through panelists. Unmute yourself. Let's go ahead and introduce ourselves to our new audience members who are here. The chat room is cracking. And look who joined us. Her little face just showed up. Go ahead, True, since you were just smiling and kikiing for a second.
I know I was late. Can you hear me good?
Yes,
Because I'm in
ma'am.
the meeting room at the hotel. You know my situation. So we're almost there. We have like 2 more days. But I'm so glad to see everybody. This was a well-needed episode. It was timely, and I'm just so glad to see everybody from their summer vacays. So
We had a little summer vacay. I went to Mexico. I've been to a lot of different places. Yes.
yeah.
All right, Miss Bernice, you're up next. You're on mute, ma'am. Let me make sure.
Yes, sir.
Okay, if she works it out, Ellen, you go right on ahead.
Oh, hey, Ellen Fernandez Sacco here from sunny and rainy Tampa, Florida. Just trying to keep it together in these last couple of days, which has just been astounding.
Oh, yes, and we're giving a big, huge hug to Ellen because Ellen has had a pretty big loss in her family. Her father passed away, and so we've all been with her in spirit. Just wrapping our arms around her and giving her nice hugs and
Yeah.
salutations. And we missed having you these past few episodes. So we
I
love
missed it
you.
too.
And we're so glad you're back, Ellen. We are so glad you're back.
Me
All
too.
right. Resident Y chromosome, number 1, the elder of the two.
I like that. Number 1. Good evening, everybody. My name is James Morgan III. I'm coming to you from cloudy Prince George's County, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. I'm happy to be here, and I have been busy. I done been to Kansas and Missouri and Florida all in one summer, so I'm nice and crispier than I normally am, but I'm always happy to be here. Before I turn it over, I do want to say one thing. I would like to acknowledge the fact that today would have been my maternal grandmother's 78th birthday. So happy heavenly birthday to Miss Evelyn Glover, who was she was my everything. She really was. And then also I would ask that you all just pray for my paternal grandfather, James Morgan Sr. He's hospitalized with a collapsed lung and some very serious heart issues, and he's a 93-year-old World War II veteran, and he's not doing very well at all. So please keep him in your prayers. Other than that, I'm happy to be here.
All right. Teresa Vega.
Hey, Teresa Vega, uptown near the Boogie Down Bronx, New York
Boogie
City.
Boogie Down, hip hop anniversary
Right?
on YouTube.
Radio Roots for Requa Branches, and this is going to be a fun week for me because I'm going to be joining the illustrious Bernice Bennett on Thursday for her podcast on Malagasy Roots with Professor Wendy Wilson Hall. So, yay!
All right. Other resident Y chromosome, youngest person in the house, that would be
everybody. My name is Willie Russell, and I'm from Oakland, California.
All right, Willie is here. All right, chat room is cracking off as usual. We've got our regulars, Denise Muhammad. We've got Dustin Austin, who's joined us. Tiara Kello is here. We also have, let's see who else is here. Kim Allen, Adrian Wells, Clarice Mason. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Like I said, this is a needed mental health break when it comes to what's going on in the world right now. So this will be a nice siesta for all of us, considering all the crazy news we've heard. All right, Bernice, let's try to check your audio again. No, ma'am, we cannot hear you. I would suggest go to your settings on your MacBook and make sure you have everybody selected. So, all right.
The cogwheel.
The cogwheel, yeah. And the cogwheel in the browser in the Hangout window should help. All right. So, let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't announce Shelly Murphy. She wanted to make sure that we knew she was in the chat room. She was like, I'm here. Apparently she didn't get a shout out. So she wanted to make sure that she was
okay.
There.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Celebration.
Okay. Celebration. Hello, everyone. Bernice Bennett, Blog Talk Radio.
Absolutely. All right. So let's dive into the content. You all know DNA is huge. Genealogy has a boom, right? I think the last statistics I looked at for the teaser release for Finding Your Roots, it had nearly 500,000 views so far since it's been released. Genealogy is huge right now. And, you know, we're all interested in it. You know, we've got a million commercials. I think I watched CNN the other day and I saw 2 different commercials for 2 different DNA tests just with me sitting down watching, you know, one of the morning anchors. And so, you know, genealogy, family history is all around us. And because it is, you know, there are definitely some conversations that we all need to have when it comes to privacy or ethics in this particular space. Some people may have not considered that when it comes to genealogy and DNA, but these are definitely needed conversations, especially with some of the things that are being unearthed with DNA and technology and how you handle certain things in families, what we've all seen in our experiences online, you know, being in various groups, on Facebook or just on social media. You know, there's a lot of dialogue and conversations that we need to have that I think should be happening in our community that are maybe happening maybe through the, you know, the presentation sense. You know, I know Bernice and me have talked about this. We presented on this at Maggie. It's a topic that we're both very passionate about. I know that Blaine Bettinger has presented on the same issue. This is just, like I said, this is something that just needs to be discussed. So the first question I have for everyone tonight, and there are several, and this is, you know, really talk about what you would do as a family historian genealogist, right? That's what this dialogue is for. And in the chat room, be sure you answer these questions as well. You discover that a close family member has a biological parent they are unaware of, or in this situation, we call that a Paul, not Paul, right? And that, for those who don't know, that's a reference that harkens back to The Color Purple, as in when Celie was at the funeral and she found out who she thought was her dad was not her dad. So is it in good taste to withhold the information, or is it your duty to let this family member know that who they thought their biological parent was not their biological parent?
I believe that the truth shall set you free anytime and all the time, but I think that the ethics of that come into play is always in how you communicate information and when, and not necessarily to pass judgment, and also to be sensitive to a person's feelings, and especially if you don't know that person as well as you may know some others. You know, recently I actually had a situation recently, which I shared with Nika and I think Teresa as well, where I have a new DNA match that matches my mother so closely that I was able to look at her tree, which was pretty well done based on the information she had, and my tree. And I said, wait, something's wrong here. Something's wrong here, and it's going to affect somebody, probably somebody alive. It's going to affect. We don't know the exact details, but to me, it was looking like one of those type of situations. And what I knew I had to do was I had to handle the situation sensitively, because again, it's not trying to say, well, your mother or grandmother or whoever lied or granddad lied. They may not have known. Something may have happened. So what I try not to do is I try not to pass judgment on things that were happening in the past, and I try to stay focused on telling the truth and letting the truth be known, and then people can do with it what they will. But I just try to let the truth be known. But that's just me.
Yeah, I want to just chime in. I don't feel that taste is the issue. I believe that the situation should dictate your response. For example, is your close family member seeking information about her family? Would this information harm her or cause harm to other family members? And, you know, a question that I would ask is, do you have the skills to deliver the information in a sensitive and compassionate way? And also, I would want to know, you know, are her parents, whoever is her parent, are they alive, to determine how that information should be transmitted? I think you should definitely move very slowly. Don't go blast it out on Facebook, and don't make it part of the family gossip before you really assess what's happening with this information, what you want to do with this information.
Okay. Those are 2 different perspectives. Anybody else want to weigh in?
Well, for me, I haven't ran into that yet, and I have been trying to be very strategic on who I'm testing in my family, because as you know, we have 23 kids for Granddaddy Ike, and just by the documentation, I can see things where my loopholes are. So with that being said, we're very organized. So I have 2 elders, a president of our family to go to confer with all these things with before we, go to that family member, or we'll talk to the elder of that child's descendants. So I just know I would want to be truthful about it, but I have established, trust and relationships with the elders in my family. So usually when things like this come up, I go to them. Out of the 23 kids, I know who the elder is in each one of those Granddaddy Ike's kids. So that's the formula I've been using. But I do see a lot of good advice out there from Shannon and Bernice, and a lot of the top people that you usually see in DNA talking about that situation. But I know for me personally, that's how I've been handling it, and that's how I'm going to move forward. But I don't want to do any harm to anybody that's living in my family right now. I would do it gently and with care, and respectful as much as possible, because that is such a touchy thing.
It is. Ellen, you want to chime in?
I just think that it's, when you've been working with documentation, you can be so familiar with it. And I think that you're going to stop and speak with whoever's involved. But then with something like DNA, there's so many people testing, so many people are not aware that there are actually standards and there are steps out there. A lot of them, actually, a lot of people are writing to this, but a lot of people aren't aware. They're really excited to go get the test and find out who the match is. And then when you come up with the paw not paw situation, it really, I've seen it in family members have told me about explosions, literal exploding families where people won't talk, and there's splits now because there wasn't time, and it was not, it's just, and I understand people's emotions really run so high with this. The stakes can be so high for some, especially if somebody feels like, my mother's out there and she's only got a little bit of time, and she's, this is the only window I have to get to this person. The ethics, a lot of times, for some people, just go out the window. And really what you need to do is take that deep breath and then decide, like, well, who is this gonna help?
True.
And
Willie,
who am I gonna reach out to?
Willie, what do you think as a millennial, as one of the younger people?
I agree with what Ms. Bernice said. It depends on the person, but I would, if it were me, I would want to know, just to know, because then that gives you a clue to who you are in a sense. Also, to know that maybe my dad really isn't my dad, but who is my dad? So maybe I can build that relationship with that person, or try to figure out what happened. So it's a way to go about telling the people. That's what I would try to figure out, that way to approach that person.
Teresa?
And I was going to say, I agree across the board with everyone. I haven't necessarily in my own personal DNA cousins come up with anything like that, but I am also cousins with a lot of Puerto Rican, let's say, adoptees, and they sometimes come up with these very personal issues, and it's hard because I have one cousin who has an inkling of who her father might be, and she had made a first or a second cousin match, and this person, they're not talking to her or are slow in giving information because people are still around, and there were stories that weren't told, or so you have to be very careful and strategic. I always tell people, go slow. There's as Ellen said, people want to rush, but you really need to take it slow and consider all scenarios, all bases, and let relationships happen as naturally as they can, and not try to force it onto people, because you need that process of just coming in and getting acclimated. This person may not have known they have, let's say, a child or parent. You have to take it slow and consider how it's going to impact everybody.
I agree. I kind of side with everyone's opinions. I think, the truth definitely will set you free, but then to me, it's kind of how you go about, saying it. In my opinion, I think also something that we don't consider when we're talking about this very subject is, as genealogists, we look at things very like, okay, the document says this. Like it's this date, it's this location. With DNA and with paternity or maternity, we don't factor in that it's not just the science or that it's not just the facts. The fact that, you know, whoever took the test, if they were, you know, maybe misled by a parent or maybe the parent didn't know or whatever, there's all this other emotional stuff that like comes with it, right? And that you have to think about the fact that, especially if it's a question of paternity, they're questioning whether or not their mother was out in the streets and was living a life that they didn't know, right? And maybe misled them about the type of person that they were. You know what I mean? And whether or not they have to reckon with that or reconcile that. And then they then begin to think, well, what you know, do people in the community judge me because they know my mother was out there lying about who my father was? Because you have to also consider that that some of these folks are taking these tests. They may have had people in their family. I've seen people say some awful things to folks in their family when they know that or when they think they know that their father is not their father. Like they'll just say, you know, well, you weren't wanted. I've heard that. I've heard people say that. Or, you know, that's not really who your father is. Or the child will have a big event. I'm serious. Have a big event, be at graduation, and who the father potentially was will come, and they will say, well, you know, that's not really your dad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so this has a lot more to do than with just facts. This is like home training to me. That's what my mama would call it. This is home training.
Not only that, but when you think about DNA, you go through this roller coaster of emotions. I mean, people are so excited to show that they're giving their sample. But then you go through this emotion of waiting and frustration because those results haven't come in. And then the results come in and then there's some confusion. Wait a minute, what am I looking at? What am I supposed to do with this? And then you see something that you didn't expect to see.
Exactly.
And that's where you have to determine, do I run and blast it off to everybody, or do I just sit back and really assess what I'm looking at?
I agree.
Before I make that next big step.
And one thing that I think that we also have to remember too is that you can't make the assumption that you know what you're talking about as well.
That's right. Yes.
You can't make the assumption, like for example with the match that I mentioned earlier. You know, when she and I had a conversation, because Nika was the first person I actually called about this, and I spoke to Nika and then I spoke to my mom. And when I finally talked to the person themselves, you know, I said, hey, look, you know, truth be told, I'm pretty sure my grandfather and my tree is together. I have not tested my grandparents, none of them, but I've tested my parents and all that good stuff. So I don't want to assume that I know what I'm talking about beyond what I can prove scientifically. But I want to let you know X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah. Thankfully, in this case, the person was like, oh, well, I'm not sure my grandfather's really my grandfather, so we can have a conversation, you know, so it worked out. I just don't think you can assume, well, hey, look, you know, I know my tree is perfect and your dad is not your dad. Like, don't do that. You have to be sensitive, and you also have to be objective. Don't try to come in, because you never know. You might mess around and find out something that you thought was true wasn't true for you. You see?
Right.
So be humble.
What you said. Now, along the same vein here, the next question I have is, what role does discretion play in traditional genealogy and genetic genealogy? When you find out these stories potentially of rape, of incest, of, you know, murder, I mean, you just run down the gamut of maybe potentially not positive topics. What role does discretion play? What role is family history, you know, have family historians, genealogists? How discreet do we need to be? Or how discreet are you? Let me ask this to you all personally. How discreet are you when it comes to these tough topics?
Yeah, go ahead, Ellen.
It
was Bernice.
Well, I mean, for me, the discretion is kind of the first line of response. I'm not going to just jump and give anything until I have an opportunity to form some type of dialogue. And then once I have this dialogue, then I may take it to the next level. Or I may ask the question, why did you test your DNA? What were you looking for? Just to get a feel for who I'm talking to. It may be something that's very volatile, or it may be I just want to know my ethnicity. But I think that it's always helpful to find out who are you talking to. Get to know the person that's matching your DNA before you blast out. Oh, guess what? We, you know what? We have the same daddy. You just need to be a little more discreet and gently walk yourself into this whole arena of providing information.
All right. Anyone else want to chime in? What role does discretion play? And and we started off talking about DNA, but we also have to discuss this with regard to traditional genealogy, because we all are maintaining databases or records, right? So what role does discretion play for you when it comes to maintaining facts that may not necessarily be very positive?
Again, I just can't reiterate how good my family is. I had my dad and my 2 aunts and 2 other aunts that were living at the time, and they were all over between 85 and 91. So when these issues came up with me, that I would find the 1880 11/7 divorce decree that granddaddy had really married somebody else first before our grandmother, but he got caught being pinned, being daddy, but he wasn't. I talked to my elders a lot and confirm things and just keep it to my heart. And I've been doing this for a while, and I just feel like personally, I kind of know when to spill the beans, or, grab 5 or 10 family members and let's just talk about it. But I don't blurt things out. I keep a lot of things close to my heart. And now that they're all gone and I only have my one aunt now, and she's getting old, I'm starting to have to make those decisions on my own. So that's going to be a test for me, but I've had quite a bit of practice now. So yeah, I get a lot of those documents, but I usually, like I said, go to my elders and ask them about it just to back up what I see. And if I have to show it to them and bring it to them, and it'll jog their memory on what was going on. So that's how I've been doing it since 98.
Well, some people use social media as a way to share information, and it just depends on what that information is. Yeah, some people do overshare. They give graphic details about what's going on in the home. And they almost like use social media as the therapist. And perhaps this is where we as genealogists may need to take that one step and say, perhaps you might want to consider taking that offline. Or is there somebody you could talk to in private about this situation, rather than putting it out to 2,000 people to react to that pain that you're feeling? Because what I'm seeing a lot on social media is a lot of pain. A lot of pain. And it is something that if there's going to be any kind of skills building that takes place with genealogists, it may be in the area of just a little how to counsel and how to give information without blasting it, because we're so comfortable with what we have. But then there are people who may not be comfortable as being the recipient of that information.
Right. Well, one thing for me, particularly with social media, because I'm like I'm sure like many of you all out there, I run a couple family groups on social media, and one thing that I'm very big about is if it's not your child, don't post it or anything like that. Because sometimes we can, and again, especially if you know the person and you're proud to say, oh, such and such got into college or this is going on. I'm very big on if it's not your child or not you. Don't post it when it's somebody who's a minor, because that can get into a whole lot of other things. And even though you may have good intentions, you don't want to cross those lines. And even when I'm reaching out to like people who I don't know personally, I'm getting a rapport with them. If we're exchanging information, I don't have kids. I'll tell you that I don't have kids. But I will say, hey, if you're comfortable, what kids do you have? I can add them on a tree or whatever. But don't feel obligated to share that with me if you don't feel comfortable, if we haven't built that rapport. But normally, again, we build a relationship and I've never really run into a problem, but that's just something I have a sticking point with is kind of not getting too deep with kids.
Okay. We've got some interesting questions for the chat room that I'll throw in while we're having this discussion. I have a few more that I want to get to before the the rest of the questions I have for tonight. But we have one viewer who asked, "What about illegitimate children from 100 plus years ago? Been struggling with that with a great grandfather I discovered was illegitimate. How should I approach the cousin match who may be related to his possible father?"
Reach out.
Yeah.
Yeah, reach out.
Reach out with the
I was
connection.
gonna say, take the four tops. Take the four tops. I call it the four tops approach.
Yeah.
Reach out.
Reach out. Provide your information that you have gathered. See what they have, and see if they've spoken to other family members. There's a way to provide that information, and you could say this is not the right person. I mean, I'm looking at a situation right now, and I have questions about, is this the father? And so what I'm doing is I'm really digging as much as I can before I even conclude with what I believe is right. So I want to be absolutely positively right. So I might wait to get 10 more DNA matches and triangulate them before I say, he's not the father. It's somebody else.
I agree. I work it until there's
I
no
work
other
it.
options. Yeah.
Well, oftentimes too, I think one thing that we have to deal with in Black genealogy as well is we don't like to use this word, but we have many ancestors who were like illegitimate from the plantation slavery type of situation.
Yes.
And so, what I try to do when in those situations, I don't try to make the person I'm talking to feel guilty or make allegations or this, that, third, and just say, hey, look, in general, I say, hey, we have a genetic tie. I think I may know what it could be. If you're interested in talking about it, let's have a conversation. But I don't try to put that person on trial for something that may have happened 100 years ago.
Judgment.
Especially in situations of rape. Like, that's a very sensitive topic for sure, but that still creates a genetic link that we may or may not want to discuss. If you don't want to discuss it, no harm, no foul. Have a blessed day.
Right. But your DNA may say, and you're looking at the chromosome, and you can say, it looks like we have the same 3 times great grandparent.
Right.
I mean, and then this is the way I present this, especially to my European DNA cousins. It's looking like, because it is on a chromosome that I could see as a European chromosome. And let them take it where they want to take it. If they're not interested, then that's it. It's over. If they are interested, then maybe they'll provide me with some additional information.
I agree. I think it especially gets sticky when we're talking about people who have identified as a certain racial designation and they discover that they maybe weren't 100% that, and that maybe that potentially there is a parent involved that they don't know is a biological parent, and that parent identifies as a different group. I think that kind of is one of those sticky areas where you kind of really have to tread lightly. I've seen that happen in several cases where a person may have thought they were one thing when they took the test, and then the results came back and it discovered that they were multiracial. And so there may have been somebody in the family passing, maybe stories didn't come down, maybe they weren't told the right person was their parent. I mean, there's a number of different ways that happens, but I think that happens quite often. There's another question before we move back into the ones that I have established for this evening, is one from Yvette Porter-Moore. She says, when do you decide the story of date rape is not necessary? What if you want your kid to know their cousins and half siblings despite the circumstances?
Can you repeat the question? I just want to make sure I process that.
Yeah, you're trying to process. All right. She says, when do you decide the story of date rape is not necessary? What if you want your kid to know their cousins and have siblings despite the circumstance? So basically what she's saying is, if a child was born as a result of a rape and the parent acknowledges this, does there ever come a time where you don't say that it was a date rape? Or does discretion, or does that whole discretion conversation roll into that?
has a
I
Y
think
chromosome among.
That's going to
right.
vary by person. That's the
I
situation.
think each person has to make that decision if they want to explain how conception took place in the circumstances under which that happened. A child is not interested in how they became that child. They're interested in, that's my mom, that's my daddy.
I disagree with that, Miss Bernice. I think some people
I don't know if people want to know how well it depends. I think it's the situation.
It is
I
situational.
really think it's situational. If you want to know that your mother or father were involved in a date rape incident, then it's up to that child to go and seek out that information from the parent, and it's up to the parent to make the decision if they want to share that information.
Well, what if they're an adoptee and a DNA match shows up from the family, perhaps of the biological mother who knows the story?
Yeah. Again, it just depends on the situation.
Yeah, it depends on the situation.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I know that I've seen the stuff on Facebook where people have put these stories and they think it was a result of a date rape. Sometimes it's just so painful. It's so painful for individuals to even talk about the situation. So I think you just need to tread lightly. That's just my opinion.
Ellen, were you going to add anything?
It just depends. I mean, I've seen someone on YouTube determine her father, and she's a very close relationship with her mother. She figured out through DNA who her father is, and she's a product of a rape. Her mother told her when she was young. She's a very self-assured and a very strong young woman, and she figured it out. And she didn't contact anybody, which is the thing that really struck me. She found out who it was, but she didn't have to. She didn't have to talk to anybody. Basically, it's at that point now. Between the connections and putting everything together, that she reconstructed her story. And then for her, that was right for her, I don't know what it would be for her mother or anything. She didn't go and identify her at all. But it was it's powerful to see that people can deal with it. And I think now, because relationships are so varied and we have so many different combinations, and marriages, you don't have to stay in a marriage if it's not working out. If you're not married, your kid's not out of wedlock. It is not nobody's rolling their eyes or anything really anymore.
You would hope.
So I think that's, well, yeah, I know, but I mean, really, but it's not like the 50s. It's not like the 40s, 50s, 60s, what women had to put up with, which made it even more, which I think also complicates the story now for people doing a DNA, True.
So let's see. The next question I have is, what is okay and what is not okay to share when it comes through to genetic genealogy? Does it matter if it's online or offline? James kind of alluded to his policy. He doesn't require that people give him information about their children. Other people differ. We're talking about date rape, you know what I mean? And some people feel very comfortable sharing this information online. What are the policies that you all have when it comes to what's okay and what's not okay? I know for me personally, there's a part of my database that no one has access to but me. And the facts are locked down. It doesn't go off for public consumption, and some of the information that I found was through public records. It wasn't because I went through some secret channel and was like anonymous and got the information. These are like verified potential maybe marriages or other things that have taken place. And then I've gotten contacted by family members, and they don't come at me like, oh my gosh, why'd you put that in there? Because how would I know? They come at me like, look, this man was abusive to me and my children, and I don't want his name, I don't want his name publicly. You can keep him in your records just for whoever comes after, but I don't want him, and that's perfectly fine. So I lock down those particular people. I don't know everyone else's policy in those situations. I will actually change the person's given name to do not publish. So then that way I can exclude them from any reports or anything that I include. And then their actual name may be also known as. And I'll include the person, I'll include what the person told me on this date. They requested that I not include this information, for very emotional, or personal reasons, blah, 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 because I'm just thinking about whoever comes after me might come across that marriage license and then reignite this entire thing all over again. So what are you all's policies about what's okay to share, what's okay not to share when it comes to DNA and just traditional genealogy? And does it matter if it's online or offline?
Well, one thing that happened with me, kind of along those lines, was on one branch of my family, there was a little bit of incest that occurred. And I have one relative that she married and had children with, it was her second cousin, it was both of my relatives. And when I was talking to her, I said, did you, I didn't realize what I was saying. I said, do you realize that y'all were related and whatnot? And she said, and she actually laughed. She said, I found out about that after we were married and had kids, and I had no idea. I really had no idea. And she was very big on, she didn't care that people knew about the situation because it is what it is. But what she did care about was that she said, James, I don't care who you tell that to, but please make sure people know that we did not know that before we got married. We found out after we were married and already had children. Please don't make it seem like we knew that already. And I said, sure, no problem. If that's what you want, no problem. So I'm very sensitive when it comes to that, because that does happen a lot more than people want to admit.
That isn't so much incest as consanguinity. I mean, we have this problem in Puerto Rico when people would get married, they get dispensas, they get a dispensation from the church. The ones that weird me out the most are from the 18th and 19th century, where you have an uncle marrying their niece. That doesn't really happen anymore.
My great-grandmother married her uncle.
There you go. Yeah. And then when you see these things, you can really, there's a lot to figure out, but it's really was getting permission of the church. But it does bug people out when they don't know initially, and then they found out later. They find out later that there's this, this relationship.
And it's very common in endogamous communities like Puerto Rico. I can't tell you how many cousins I have where I'm related to both husband and wife, but and they're related to each other, but they didn't know. And it's just, endogamous communities. I tend to be, I haven't come across too many issues like that. Given my great grandmother married her uncle, I sort of tell that story just as, because I find it interesting. And as Ellen said, it's just part of Puerto Rican history that these marriages did occur. And it was a way to preserve wealth within the family. But I tend not to disclose information, like that. I tend to write, as you guys know, about way back in the past, where then I feel like I can spill the beans because everybody's dead and gone. And if I do spill the beans, I have receipts to back them up. It just depends. One thing that I've come across is when, for instance, my blog post, DNA Doesn't Lie, and that response had to do with someone telling me to remove something which was a known fact that anyone could Google, because I was going to, what did she say, ruin her distinguished ancestors' reputation. And my response to that is, when you can Google something and it pops up, and this is a known fact, then you can't argue against that fact. Okay, so one thing I know, and right now I'm in the process of writing my Virginia blog, and then all this mess has come up. But again, as the descendants of slaves and slave owners, there's a lot of stuff that's heavy that deals with rape, deals with incest, or torture, whatever. And what is our responsibility when we tell these stories? To me, my obligation to my ancestors and whenever I write is to tell the truth. And to have the receipts to back up that truth. So when someone questions me, I can say, look, you can't tell me he didn't do this, because here's his papers. This is what he said. So you can't say on one occasion, oh, she made that up. No, I think it's, if you're going to say something, especially if it involves the past, have the documentation. And be careful about what you're saying. Make sure you have the documentation to back it up. And in terms of living relatives, I tend to stay away from all that stuff.
Yeah, I have just a personal preference. I have a personal preference to go offline as soon as possible with people that I connect with my DNA. I realize that I'm communicating with strangers, and I mean, they don't know who I am. The only thing we have in common is we share DNA. And so I look for something on their tree, if they have a tree, or share information to say, I'm seeing some commonality with some of our matches that may be pointing to my maternal line. And that's the way I say it. Or it may be pointing to my paternal line. And would you be interested in communicating with me offline so that we could figure this out? And yes, I do give my email address because I think it's easier and better for me not to keep putting messages into the system that has been set up by the DNA testing company. I would rather get out of that system. And I will say, before we go any further into our sharing, let's go offline.
I agree. I tend to do that with most of the people who contact me. I prefer email or phone. I have no problem with giving out my phone number or email. And if we can, because to me, it's all about establishing a relationship the right way, the correct way. If this person is willing to talk to me, has information that could be useful to me or vice versa, then I don't want to maintain an informal, a formal thing, email this. Just, I say what I have to say. Do you want to call me? Here's my number. If you want to email me, fine. But I do tend to reach out to people immediately if I can find a specific link or I know exactly how we're related. For example, Ellen knows I've been researching one of my Puerto Rican lines, the Noboa line, and I have a bunch of matches, all from Aguada. I descend from every Noboa from Aguada, but there's a community in a different town that I have these DNA cousins. So I'm trying to find the link. I found one guy and he's telling me about his family. I'm like, well, they came from Aguada. And we start to have this conversation. He automatically shared his tree with me. It was a private tree. He's like, whatever you find out, let me know. And I'm like, okay, no problem. But I think it helps to establish a relationship like you would any relationship. Reach out to the person, get to know them, and it goes beyond that. And I maintain, I talk to all my cousins across the board. Doesn't matter what color shade, whatever. I have meaningful relationships with them all. And some of them we know how we're related. Others we're still trying to find out. But the conversation is there.
I just had that happen myself with, but it was funny. My cousin turned out, I found a first cousin on Ancestry, and he I wind up contacting him, but it wasn't because he had the tree so much. It was sort of like he was starting his DNA, but he shut that all down. I don't even know exactly where the matches are for us. So, but I found an overlap on a tree, and I reached out to him. I sent him one picture, and he sent me back a picture that was taken the same afternoon. So it just really, it was pretty amazing. And then, then deciding, well, what are you going to do with this relationship? And like, what part of the story is your story? What part of the story is mine? Or what is it that, we can give to each other to fill out the tree or fill out the narrative? So there can be really wonderful things that happen. And Teresa, for instance, is a wonderful DNA thing that has happened in my life. And so is True. And, so it's really can be really unexpected and very special. It doesn't all have to be this, who is this person I've just contacted and like what, I just can't believe, like you've opened the closet door and everything has fallen on you,
True. Moving forward though, in this discussion, you discover you're closely related to an adoptee. And in closely related, I mean first cousin. How do you approach conversations with your family about this newfound member?
I've been there.
Let's remove the adoptee, because the adoptee took the test likely because they want to know answers. Let's talk about how you handle your immediate family, because to be clear, a first cousin means that you share grandparents. Well, that also means that they're related on your mother's side or your father's side. So a first cousin means that it is a niece or nephew of one of your parents.
So Nika, I told you this past Sunday, I met my highest Puerto Rican CM level cousin, 700 CMs. She's on my GenMatch list between my known first cousin and my known first cousin two times removed. She's right in the middle. So she's like a first cousin, one time removed. She knows her father's side of the family, doesn't really know her mother's side. We're working on it. We just met and had a great time. I know, because we should be sharing a set of great grandparents, that she's probably related to my great grandparents. Of course, the great grandmother who married her uncle, who are Naboa and Naboa. All she knows is her grandmother's surname might have been Gomez. My grandmother had a sister, Cecilia Naboa, who married a Celestino Gomez Figueroa. Their kids would have been Gomez Naboa. So we think this is how she's matched. I don't have any problem calling my siblings and saying, hey, this is certain. She's a first cousin, might be second cousin or first cousin, one time removed. And we know it's on my paternal grandmother's side. Are any of these, my grandmother's passed away, and her maternal grandmother's still alive. It's more of an issue on her side than it will be on mine. So,
but the question is, this is removing the person who tested as your match. We're talking about your family. You have identified a first cousin.
They won't have a problem.
So, okay, so your family won't have a problem, but not everybody's family is the same way.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. It just depends.
So what would we all do individually when it comes to this scenario? Now, in my family, technically speaking, through my mom's side, I only have her and my uncle. That's it. On my dad's side, I just have my dad and his sister. So if a first cousin pops up out of nowhere, that means that either my uncle or my dad has some situation going on, or they had a sibling that nobody knows about. So the reason why I'm kind of walking this out for you all is sometimes it's not as cut and dry of, oh, well, somebody might have known something. We rolled out the red carpet and gave them this big family history. Sometimes folks may be a descendant of several affairs.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Right. So how do you choose to approach that with your family? Remove the adoptee. They are here because they don't care. They're just trying to find relatives. But in terms of your family, how do you approach a close match that's an adoptee?
What I would do is, I'm sorry.
With discretion.
Right.
And you go to the person and you provide information. You state, I've taken the DNA test, and this is what I have found, a first cousin.
She took the words right out of my mouth. And
what it appears as if it's part of this person is definitely a part of our family. And so now as a family, and maybe there's only one person you're talking to, what are we going to do about this? What do you want to do about this? And then wait. No pressure. No guilt, just present the information and see what happens.
I completely agree with that.
My family's been very welcoming because we sort of kind of figured that it goes with the territory that kids can pop up anytime.
Yeah. In general, for for my family, in general, I mean, people kind of know that possibility could be there. But again, I just think it's important not to make allegations or not to, because again, you never really know the full situation. I mean, just because you may find a first cousin, since that's the question that's asked, and the parent that's on your side had no clue, especially if it's a male, the father may not know and go, oh, I have a daughter, I have a son somewhere. Oh my God, I need to call them now. So don't make those allegations because the person may not actually know. Like Bernie said, let that swirl around in their head for a second, and then say, okay, if this is the facts that I have, I'm presenting it to you. This is the person's email address. I've been in touch with them for a week. After that, I'm not into making allegations and assumptions. Yeah, step away from it.
Step away, and let them decide the next step.
Yeah, that's kind of my policy is, because that's the thing. People, first of all, we kind of alluded to this earlier. Folks aren't really clear on who, like, how to read their results. Like, once they get past the percentages stage, right? And they move into the actual list of matches. We're all very clear on how to read that, but a lot of people who are taking tests are not clear on that. I know that because I just met a lot of them. And they got all this stuff down, but I literally was taking people screen by screen, recently, and was showing them parts of the DNA systems, and they were not clear that this stuff was there. Furthermore, the other piece is, for me in this situation, folks forget that these tests are autosomal. Okay. They apply to both sides of your family. I've heard people say, oh, well, it just doesn't just look at your mom's side. No, they apply to both sides of your family. So that also comes into play with learning the science, because if somebody makes a rush to judgment on who the potential father is, and they don't realize how the technology works and how to narrow down relationships, they could give this adoptee erroneous information. And Shelly's raised a very, interesting question in the chat room. She said, can someone sue me if I gave them info on DNA and it was false or truth, but different than they know? And I said, outside of emotional distress, what could you sue for? And she says, defamation of character. How's it defamation of character if the information is shared between you and the person? Now, if you decide to go out on social media and share that information and it's still identifiable, then that of course, for me, is grounds for potential lawsuits. But in this case, when I've dealt with this situation, when there has been an adoptee and the person's family may not be aware of it, I will call the matriarch or the patriarch of that particular line. I will call the oldest child. I will give them the information, and then it is their business how they handle it within their immediate family. Because people don't realize the person who is the biological parent of the adoptee does not have to DNA test. Let me repeat that. The person who is the biological parent, or the persons who are the biological parents of an adoptee, do not have to DNA test. A family member can DNA test, and you can still discover who the biological parents are. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a super close relation. It doesn't have to be a brother or sister of the biological parent. It doesn't even have to be a first cousin. It could be a second cousin, a third cousin, even a fourth cousin, where you can, narrow down the repetition in the surnames, all that kind of stuff. So I'm saying this, and I'm imploring everybody to really, really consider these things when we're buying these tests for $69. Remember, the deal ends today, right? And you're asking your family members to test. And you have to consider this. There's a second part to this question that I'm going to add in here. Have you considered the emotional and technical support you could offer your adopted cousin, or is it not your place to offer either?
Emotional and technical support. That's interesting.
What I mean by emotional, we know what I mean by emotional support. Technical support, I mean, is, let's say you identify and a person contacts you, they're an adoptee, and they say, I'm trying to find my parents. You could easily tell them, you know what, I'm not sure if I'm ready for that, if it's a close match.
I mean, for me, I don't know if I can speak to the emotional support as much. To technical support, I mean, I don't have a problem. I'll tell you, I've had a couple of adoptees that have reached out to me, and it's kind of personal for me because my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was in foster care. So I tell them, look, I will tell you what I know, and if we have a genetic tie, if we see something, that may help you out, I don't have a problem with doing that. In terms of the emotions of it, I don't know that I don't know that I have that skill set personally or professionally to offer that type of support. Even if I knew what the link was, who the parent was, the only thing I can say is, hey, I think I have an idea of what line it may be. Let me do some homework, and I can do some technical support. I don't have a license in psychology or therapy or anything like that, because I know that's a deep that's a deep emotional trauma for people, and I don't know that I have that skill set.
Yeah, I tend to do both. With any DNA cousin who's an adoptee, I just feel like it's my responsibility to share my tree and to help them. I know if it was me, I would want help, and so I try to at least, if they give me their GEDmatch number, I can normally decipher you know, if it's my paternal grandmother, let's say, or my paternal grandfather, or I give as much information as I can. If I can say we have X amount of cousins in common, I do that. And again, it depends on, I've helped some DNA cousins who are adoptee who I'm not close to, and I have other cousins who are adoptees who I became close to. So again, it just depends on the individual, but I always try to help any way I can, because I know I would want someone to help me. And I also give them just, you know, basic adoptee support websites, etc., so that they have some idea of where to go.
Right. I feel the same way. I mean, I think I can offer emotional and technical support. Clearly, the technical support is what they need, because you're helping them understand how to go through a genealogical journey, if you will, or at least how to put together information that they may have, and then whatever they have, you kind of put that with what you can find to just help them move that journey along the way. I do have a desire to help someone if they are seeking assistance and finding a parent. The first thing I'm going to do is ask some basic questions. And if they don't even, if they can't even say where they were born, or if they can say where they were born, but now they don't have birth certificates, or they having difficulty in certain jurisdictions getting more information, that I'm going to direct them to the right resources. And I think that's a responsibility for us to say, well, have you looked at CC Moore, you know, the DNA detectives? Have you looked at these various groups that can help you? And if it's a close family member, yes, I will be there, so that if that person is having some problems or some misgivings about what's going on, or feeling this sense of rejection from family members, as a family member, I'm there to say, you know, I care, and just wait till everybody else get to that place. But I'm not going to totally reject somebody just because they're an adoptee and I can't figure it out, or they can't figure it out. I'll be there to say, we may find something. Let's just keep looking, and let's stay in touch.
Well, and I would also like to add in, I mean, this sounds so preposterous, people not acknowledging adoptees, but we all have encountered folks who reject us just because we're Black.
Yes.
So why is it, you know, we should never think it's preposterous that people would reject an adoptee. It's they're two very uncomfortable situations and very uncomfortable dialogues that are being had, you know, and I'm the same way. I'm going to offer them as many resources as I possibly can. I'm going to try to help them track down. One of the things that I often tell folks, especially if they're trying to find parents, is this may not happen overnight. This may take years. And I don't think enough of us are being that transparent with them about the fact that sometimes it just takes the right person testing. Sometimes it just takes the right person responding. And it's not just this, it's a quick fix, like, oh, we're going to find the answer immediately. For some people, it happens that way. And for some people, it doesn't. I just want to chime in with a very good comment. We all love Genealogy Jen. That's our girl. And one of the things she said she did was, I changed my ancestry profile to say I welcome adoptees and people of color. She said, I want to help any and all cousins possible. After one of the chats you did and said people wouldn't respond to you based on your picture, I want them to know that I'm white but willing to help.
Great.
Which I found that is true, because according to We're Related, that me and Genealogy Jen are actually related. So she's a woman of her word.
She is a woman of her word. Well, I actually got excited because somebody with her name Genealogy Jen was on GEDmatch and showed up in my GEDmatch results, but it was another Genealogy Jen, and I was so mad. I was like, it's not my Jen. We were all like, we were ready to cigar everything. We were ready to go.
Oh my God! Let me tell you something. I put my vacation at Disney World on pause when I saw me and Genealogy Jen were related. I called her and was like, I knew it from day one. I knew it. I knew it. It was something about her. I knew it. We have the same sense of humor. I love genealogy.
Oh my gosh. Oh my
And
gosh.
I
All
love
right.
sharing my baby with y'all because she is my first. So right now.
So I've got a couple of questions before we wrap up for the evening because we have a lot of current events to get to, and we also have an Ask Mariah case for tonight as well. So next to last question, let's talk permissions. Do you have agreements with the people whose DNA tests you administer or manage, and are they verbal or written?
I have verbal agreements. Uh, I manage several kits, and I have 3 kits of which I cannot do anything with. I can't put the information on JetMatch. I cannot share information with their matches. I mean, this is what they said, and so I must abide by that. Then I have 3 other kits that I manage that I could do whatever I want, and I have been told I can do whatever I want.
I have 2 sibling kits that I manage, and my 101-year-old cousin Helen, and I have permission to use their stuff, but I don't really use it. It's more for my own personal comparison, and just having 2 other people to compare with. But I'm lucky. Out of 6 siblings, 5 have been tested. I'm just waiting to test another brother. So.
For me, I tested only the kits that I manage on my parents. My dad told me that when I got his DNA results back, that if I found any other kids outside of me and my brother, not to tell my mom. And my mom told me if I found any other kids outside of me and my brother, to make sure I told her first. So that's a true story. That's what happened.
No, I know.
Mama said tell her first.
True.
You were saying, how do we have permission? Phrase that again, how you said that.
I said, do you have agreements with the people whose DNA kits you administer or manage? Are they verbal or are they written?
Okay, so yes, I do manage 8 kits, and the majority of them are my immediate family, meaning mom, dad, whatever. But when I'm managing some of my cousins that are like 3rd and 4th, which is like at least one of them, I think I do want to start doing the written, even though we kind of do though from email, because he had to transfer everything over to me. So yeah, maybe I do have a verbal agreement with everybody, but I like the written portion of it. And I think as I go deeper into it, I think that's something I'm going to want to have me like a form done up so I can start doing that.
What about you, Willie?
Currently, right now, I only manage my parents' kits, and so they said I can do with it as I please.
Do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
My mom and dad are like.
Yeah. And Genealogy Gen brings up an important point now that Ancestry now requires you to register kits under separate accounts. They don't allow you to manage multiple kits anymore. You can give people access, with different roles because they've expanded the roles, but they don't allow you to manage multiple kits anymore. I know it's just sad for me. The way that I've skirted around this is I've encouraged my family members to test and to manage their own accounts and then give me access to that. And, with all the systems that we use, you can't download raw data unless you're the person that goes in and has the login information. And, with 45 people tested in my family, that just makes things quick and easy. And, most people, they will trust me with their new firstborn child, but I just do not want that responsibility. And if something happens, if people get uploaded to a site and they don't want to be there, whatever, I allow people that space to do that. And some folks tell me I'm crazy and they can't understand that. Well, you have to wait for them to give you access. Well, then I'll wait 2 years or I'll wait 3 years, because the last thing I want is somebody telling me, well, you went out and bought. Nope. I established my policies early. I'm like, I'm consistent. Nobody can challenge me because I said what I said. and that's pretty much it. Okay, last question. Does the nature of genealogy remove the applicability of privacy?
I think it does a little bit when you're engaging in it. Actively, if you just happen to be a person who's related to somebody who's a genealogist, that's one thing. I think it does a little bit, but again, it doesn't mean that it eliminates privacy totally. I think that everybody doesn't necessarily. There are people out there, and I don't understand it, but there are people out there who are just trying to have a family tree for a project for school, or they just did it because they saw it on sale on Amazon or something like that. And then there are other people who are more hardcore with it. But I think that the nature of actually engaging in genealogical research, you do give up a little bit of privacy, but that doesn't mean you give it up entirely. And again, as my good friend Miss Bernice was saying earlier, it's all about discretion at the end of the day. Again, I know if I talk to a person directly, I try to talk about my relationship to them. I don't get into, like I said, if you want to share who your siblings are, your spouse and your kids and stuff, great. I would love to add it to my tree, and I always make sure that as much as I am given, I try to reciprocate information. But if you don't want to give up, no problem. Have a nice day. So I try to respect people's privacy as much as I can. But I'm very big on also not claiming ownership of common ancestors. I try to say, look, you have that ancestor, I have them. That's a common thing. But I don't try to delve into their personal lives too deeply, because people can get sensitive, and rightly so. We live in that kind of world now, especially with computers and everything. So yeah.
Right, and you do have some people who are very concerned about identity theft.
Of course.
And so they don't want to give up a whole lot of information. So you also have to just look at privacy. But let's face it, there's so much stuff out there right now. I mean, there really is. It is, and it's very easy to find people. It is one person that has died, and you put their name up there, and that obituary pops up, and all the whole family is there.
Well, what you said now, come on now. But the thing is, what I find hilarious, and this is one of the things that, Lord, is people who are so paranoid about DNA testing that they think it's a government conspiracy. And then I have to kindly guide people back and just remind them, I'll ask a woman, did you have a baby? And they'll say, oh yeah. I said, you left your blood and placenta at the hospital. And the hospital has your blood and your placenta, and you didn't go back and reclaim it. And then not only that, but they have your social security number, your address, your phone number. But
your employer,
but you didn't say that they were trying to steal your identity or clone you.
Right.
I always got people. I'm like, have you ever given blood? Just took a blood sample? And people go, I didn't think about that. And I said, yep, you already dropped 15 hairs right here. But it's true. Find the lie. Yeah. Find the lie. Oh my goodness. All right, so let me go ahead before we get into Ask Mariah. I'm going to cover some viewer comments that were shared with us tonight. These are some that I thought were pretty interesting. Dustin Austin said, I would warn them ahead of time before testing and ask them, do they want to know of any surprises if they would come up, no matter how close? I think that's a great policy to have when you administer tests. Just let folks know sometimes unexpected information pops up. Shelly Murphy says, I do not think the truth will always set you free.
I still love you, Shelly.
She's right.
Exactly. Kim Allen chimes in. I believe a lot of the information is dependent on the situation. Being compassionate to others' feelings and emotions are key to what we should share, and also who we should share with. I think that is a great, a great thing. All right. Thank you all so much for chiming in. The panel, the chat room has been cracking off so much tonight, which is great. I think this is a great topic. We might have to revisit this next year in 2018. What do you all think?
Yeah. Well, it's a subject that we don't talk enough about. We don't talk about the whole emotional side of genealogy nor DNA testing. And I think it is something that we should definitely talk about. We should have the dialogue at the genealogy conferences, in the small groups or what have you.
It's growing. DNA is growing, so we have to keep up with it. Yeah,
absolutely. And one thing I know we didn't even touch on at all was all this health stuff that goes on with genetic testing also. So I think that would be a good topic also in the
That's
future.
right. Right. Especially the request for your health information.
What you
We're
have
gonna get to
said.
that. Yeah.
Yep. And mapping your genome. And let me just stop while I'm ahead. All right. Ask Mariah. We are going to get
Pretty
to Ask
pictures.
Mariah. Ask Mariah is our amazing part of the show where you, the viewer, send us your questions, queries, conundrums, and we, the panel, work them out live. As always, I have to remind you that the panel never sees this information before the show happens, because if they do, they won't go to sleep and they'll work it until they beat a dead horse to death. And so tonight's question we have tonight is from Kim Morton. And here is the information that she submitted to us. She says, my great grandmother's correct maiden name, this is what she's trying to find out. She was born, raised, and died in York, South Carolina. Her name was Maggie Chambers. The problem is her, quote, maiden name. When my grandfather married his first wife, he said her maiden name was Good. I'm new to this and don't know how to get through the brick wall. Please solve this problem for me. Well, we can't necessarily solve it for you, but we can give you some help, baby. Okay. So let me reread the question from Kim Morton. She would like to know her great grandmother's correct maiden name. She was born, raised, and died in York, South Carolina. Her name was Maggie Chambers. The problem is the maiden name. When her grandfather married his first wife, he said her maiden name was Good. So this is Kim's grandfather's mother. And when he got married, marriage licenses varied during time periods. The later ones will have the parents' names on there. And it appears as though when Kim's grandfather got married, he had to list his mother's maiden name, which at the time was Good. She said, I'm new to this. I don't know how to get through the brick wall. Please solve this problem for me. Going forward, what she knows, she contacted the Historical Society to request additional information and was told her maiden name was Williams. And that her father's name is Amos Williams. So, of course, that contradicts what the marriage license says. She says, I have nothing on my family according to my dad. My grandfather, his dad, would not speak about family. So we've got conflicting information from the Historical Society that she requested. They told her that her maiden name, Maggie's maiden name, was Williams, and that her father was named Amos Williams. And she's got no other information according to her father. His father would not speak about his family. So what suggestions do we have off top for Kim tonight?
Well, just doing a very, very cursory search on some census records, I do notice that there's a Good family in that same area. And there actually is a Maggie Good. Now, I'm noticing that these are white folks that I'm looking at, but I think that that's kind of interesting that we have that same surname, and I'm looking at the same general area. I think that there may be something to that. But I mean, I could be totally swinging in the dark there, but I do see a bunch of Goods there in that area.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, I want to understand her time period. Where is she looking for this information? And then the second question is, what source did the Historical Society use, or what did they give her to tell her, in fact, the Williams was the surname? Mm-hmm. They had to have had something.
I'm thinking, I mean, this wasn't provided. Shelley and Tony worked on this, so that I don't think that information was provided. What I will say is, with historical societies, there may have been a mortuary that went out of business. They maybe acquired their books, and maybe that was left on a burial record, or perhaps if they were in a major metropolitan area, sometimes I've seen where death records for that particular city were there, and they may list that information. I think the potential issue here, Kim, is that you're not getting the information for yourself through a primary source. It's coming third hand. So if you write to the Historical Society, you're doing it in good faith. You're hoping that they're going to provide you the information for the right Maggie Chambers or Williams or Good. But unless you evaluate the source yourself, there's really no way that you can tell if they have the appropriate person.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, I was going to say, Nick, I'm looking at a Maggie Good 1910 census, and her spouse's name in York County, South Carolina, and the spouse's name is Amos Good, which is interesting too. She's mulatto.
That was going to be my other thing. Was I've seen this on several marriage licenses in my own family. the name that they put down on the marriage license for the mother, sometimes it's not always the maiden name. It may be the name that the mother is going by at that particular time. It may be a second husband. I've seen that happen a lot. And so then you're running around trying to figure, well, who is the man? Blah, blah, blah. So you probably need to reconcile stuff from whenever that marriage license happened. Look to see if you can find Maggie Goods around that time period so that you can look for marriage licenses for her to that other person. And if it was within that recent time frame where you had to list the parents' names on the marriage license, that may give you the clue as to what the maiden name was.
Absolutely.
Yeah, also, I would want to know if Maggie had any siblings, so that maybe you can find her with some siblings, so that you can find mother and father. It's just that some information is missing here, and I would definitely ask that question.
Wow. I would also look at the Charlie Chambers on the informant on her death certificate and see who that is. If it turns out to be a son, maybe there's more information to track down that way.
Yeah, and also too, it may help to try to track her spouse, the Amos that you believe is her spouse, right? It may help to track him back before he actually gets married to see who's living near or what have you.
I want to also jump in. One of the things that happened, certainly, maybe not in the last 30 years, but prior societies and genealogical societies. In fact, since hearing that you contacted the Historical Society, it kind of makes me hesitate. Many organizations have abstracts of marriages. And in many cases, prior to 1990 something, they only copied white marriages.
Come on now.
Copy the marriages of people of color. So the Historical Society, not genealogists, but the Historical Society, they pull off this thing. Oh, marriages of York County. Oh, here's a Maggie. She was the Williams. And she's getting her source, not, as you said, a secondary source. This is a tertiary source. But here is an historical society which could be using data that was not inclusive of the entire community. And so I won't even say the information is conflicting, because she's not going from the words of a person who was an informant who may have been connected to the family in some kind of way. She's taking an organization, probably using their secondary source, and that's not conflicting. It's not just, she doesn't have enough information. There's not a conflict. It's just insufficient. So I would just say that.
Let's see. We've got Kim is in the chat room. It looks like, I'm trying to see who posted this. Ellen found this death certificate on Family Search for a Maggie Chambers, female colored, who's the widow of Albert Chambers, born about 1881. It does list a father as Amos Williams. Kim mentions that Charlie was her son. So the informant on this death certificate is a Charlie Chambers, who was Maggie's son, with Albert Chambers. So Albert and Maggie being, you know, Kim's great grandparents, Charlie being Kim's great uncle, or grand uncle rather. I've seen this cause of death, pellagra. I've seen that before. I would suggest, if you're interested in that, I love the National Institute of Health. They have it's called Medline. It has a lot of old, archaic medical terms for causes of death and illnesses. If you've ever not used that, I highly suggest using it. You can just put the search in, and it will tell you it'll pull up the common term that is used now for that. Yeah. So, yeah, so that was just for free.
I would also suggest that she should go and look for a marriage record for Charlie Chambers, because South Carolina marriage records are now online. And let's say that he was definitely born after 1881, if his mother was born in 1881. So if he got married between 1915 and over that time period, there may be a marriage license where he had to give his mother's name mother's maiden name and his father's name. That might help her.
I agree. She needs to trace the kids to present. If
Trace
you
the
can't,
kids.
yeah, and if the other thing I would suggest as well, this was a huge thing that I was able to use with just random people at the conference last week. They would just walk up. That U.S. Social Security applications index was huge for anyone that had applied for one. That's how we were able to get maiden names back and forth for a lot of people. So I would suggest potentially, in addition to searching for that marriage record, also searching the U.S. Social Security applications database that's on Ancestry, and see if you can pull up information for Charlie, for your grandfather, and see what they listed their mother's maiden name as or name as on their Social Security application.
Great point.
Okay. Anything else anybody wants to add in before we keep going?
What census years does she have the family documented? She didn't say that in what we have. Has she done regular census research? And the reason I ask, a lot of times parents' years live with their married children. And you want to, of course, look at every census year that lived. And just in case an in-law or maybe a sibling or a parent could have been living with her and her family in later years. So
she mentions that Charlie does not appear to have married. He did have a daughter, but she has not found a marriage license for Charlie.
One thing one thing that everyone may want to check out also is making sure they look at church records if they have not already done so. If you can figure out what church that the family may have belonged to, that could also be a resource also.
Any other suggestions while we're at it? Let me see if she's responding back to us. She says she has found census records in the 1800s.
If she's in the room, I'm just curious. And when exactly time span did she live? Did Maggie live?
Okay.
From like approximately what year to what year?
What? Well, if that death record we just found says that she was born 1881 and then died 1945. I want to say.
Yeah.
So we have 5 census years, 1910. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I was just curious in terms of that. Looked at. Has she checked? I noticed Bernice mentioned the marriage records. There's also a marriage index. I don't know if it reflects the whole state of South Carolina, but there is an index as well as some of the marriage records for certain counties.
I think that's a good suggestion. I'd also play around with different Williams families in this death index. Mm-hmm. Searching, maybe using wildcards for Amos spelled a number of different ways. Overriding the what was I going to say? Using a question mark in the place of the O or the U on Amos because it was probably misspelled. I would do that and just search for anybody that has a father named Amos Williams and kind of track them on the census to see if that might potentially help. Shelly is hilarious talking about, was anybody a criminal? Also a suggestion to look at military records, of course, because to me, based on when the grandfather was born, there's a possibility that he was World War I. May or may not be, but he definitely was probably World War II. Look at the next of kin, nearest relative, person who always knows where you are on those particular cards. Anything else before we move forward and finish Ask Mariah you guys can think of for her? All right. I think with the exception of DNA as a last ditch effort, seeing who your DNA matches are, if you've got a preponderance of them in whatever system that have connections to York County and surrounding counties, I would look at that. Also, too, sometimes we don't find people because we haven't familiarized ourselves with the boundary changes of a particular county and when a county may have been created. So I don't know very much about this particular area, but I would research if the area that your family lived in York County was actually part of another county in previous years. That might be why you may not be able to find them. Or maybe why you may not be getting a lot of results there as well. So if no one else has anything else to share, I'm going to move on. But thank you, Kim, for sharing your case with us. And I'm sure people are probably going to continue to work it with you in the chat room as we move forward into our next segment. All right. She says she actually ordered 3 DNA kits. Good job. As a possibility. There she goes. We're trying to find some more matches, which is great. All right. So if you are interested in having us work your case when it comes to family history research, DNA, genealogy, any of that kind of stuff, be sure to submit it to us in the description area. You'll find a link in each and every recording of BlackProGen Live to submit your case to Ask Mariah. And perhaps maybe the next time you will be the one who is selected. So Kim Morton, keep us updated. Let us know what you find and have a great evening with that. So before we leave, we're going to talk about, we have a ton of current events. Some of these are just FYI, just so you know what's going on. I kind of want to spend some time tonight talking about how we can address all this crazy stuff going on politically. We'd be remiss if we didn't do that, especially since it revolves around a lot of historical stuff. I'm trying to think of who submitted this
might have been
current event. Maybe it was you. I can't remember, but
Miss Teresa.
It's Teresa. Okay, 19th century diary suggests slaves are buried in Brooklyn lot. What can you add to this, Teresa?
Well, the fun thing about this article is about a week ago, I went to the Schomburg for a book signing of a book called Dutch New York, Connecting African and Native American and Slave Histories. So the next day, this was just another example of a Dutch family who owned property and their slaves were buried in Brooklyn on their property there. And they just identified and are digging up these graves. So it was a continuation of the Dutch presence still from the 1600s into the 1800s. Interesting history.
What relevance does that have? Because a lot of people don't realize about the slave burial ground. If you could just briefly, 30 seconds, tell me about that.
Your first Africans here came, you're talking before 1620. So my family actually is a descendant of some of the first slaves from Madagascar in the 1600s and 2 Afro-Dutch families that came in the 1620s and 1640s. So when you look at the Dutch presence, we tend to forget it, that there was New Amsterdam before New York City. So you're talking early colonial roots there.
All right, something to consider and look up when you have some time. Next, we've got an article from The Guardian that talks about Negro Bill Canyon. Utah says name of a hiking spot should stay. I believe this was from Ellen.
Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay.
We can't hang.
I was just thinking about the history that's tied to locations and naming practices, and this one made the Times, I guess, because it didn't use another word, which was tied to a presidential candidate 2 years ago who had property with a slur in the title of it, and I just wondered about how these things just keep going. You know, is it what's the appropriate of it? Or at what point is it, do you still need a racial signifier for the life of this man? I don't know. I mean, it's significant, but I don't know.
I find it interesting that this article says the local and national branches of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People told the commission the name was not offensive and preserved the history of a canyon named for a Black rancher and prospector, William Grandstaff, whose cattle grazed there in the 1870s.
So why does it say William Grandstaff?
But the thing that I just find, it's like, because the NAACP said it wasn't offensive.
Right.
That means that's a wide brush that says that all Black folks don't think it's offensive.
Right.
It's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Right.
Right.
Sure are. Which colored is Negro. Moving forward. All right. Teresa, this is another submission from you, from Our Folks' Tales, Judah and her child telling the whole story at plantation houses.
Well, I think this is wonderful. Judah was a slave at the Belgrove plantation in Virginia, and along with the Whitney plantation in Louisiana, we're now starting to see our stories being told about our ancestors from the perspective of slaves. And this is always a good story because, as you know, sometimes, more often than not, we're not included in these stories. I thank God for people like Joseph McGill of the Slave Dwelling Project for pointing these stories out. And our Facebook friend Joe, he gives some excellent live feeds from a lot of these plantations and historical homes where you actually hear the perspective of the slave. So I thought this was a wonderful story, and I want us to always keep vigilant of the fact that as family historians, if we find information about a plantation or a historical home, let's publicize it and make our ancestors proud that we are telling their stories as their descendants.
And I'm going to come on camera and say this, because we're not done with current events, but I'm just going to put this out there. See, what bothers me is when I come across these blog posts, whatever, online, where people can tell me the dimensions of the plantation home, but they can't tell me about the people who were cleaning it up.
I hear you. And that's
you can tell me about the beams running across the ceiling, and they imported this marble from so and so and so, but you can't tell me anything about the people that cleaned it. Or any of the people that maintain that.
Mika, let me tell you, one thing that I love about Joseph McGill is he'll show you the fingerprint on the brick. Y'all have seen that, right? When he does his talks, so I'm like, he's looking for that thumbprint. But
he's a unique case, though. There are so many people who are sharing information online, and like I said, that that's like, to me, I just don't understand how you can separate the humanity in that. You know what I'm saying?
That's a long tradition.
Right.
Yeah.
It's an old tradition.
It is a very old tradition. You are breezing past these names on the slave schedule, or you've pulled the probate proceedings and you can see their names mentioned, but you don't care. Dimensions of a room. Okay. Moving on. Just had to put that out there, y'all. I really did. All right. Next one up is, I think this was from James. In The Half Beneath, B. Robert Wilson explores the life of a slave, his great-grandfather.
Yeah, so this particular young man has written a novel about his ancestor story, and he talks a lot about identity and how he identifies with his ancestor struggle. And for me, that kind of really resonated because I'm very big on, as a young man myself, in learning about the men in my family. Not that the women are not important, because they definitely are, but learning what my place and what my role is supposed to be as a man, and what that meant to my ancestors going back a ways. And it really hit home for me because he talked about a little bit in there about finding out about his ancestor being of mixed heritage. And, most of us have that. But for me, that resonated with me personally, because although I kind of always thought or imagined it might be there in my ancestry, when I got my DNA results, it was definitely there. And then learning about some ancestors in particular, when I really learned it was there, it really affected me in a way, because and I'll be honest with you, as a brown chocolate skinned young man, that kind of affected how I looked at myself in a way at that time. So it really resonated with me, and I hope that you guys check that out and get the book.
All right. And the last one, Army begins unearthing remains of children who died at Carlisle Indian School. I believe this was from True Lewis. Oh, wait, you're pointing to somebody else.
This both of us actually were posting. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Ellen brought it up, but I lived 50 miles away, so I had, my own recollections about this, my own feelings. So Ellen can go ahead and take the floor.
Okay. Well, I don't know how many people know about the Carlisle Industrial School, but it was the first of the Indian boarding schools that were designed to separate people from their culture, their family, their languages. And it went from 1879 to 1918. And it's on the grounds of the current Army, the campus of the Army War College. So what the story was dealing with, the Army, the U.S. Army, the War College there. So the Rosebud Sioux are looking for the repatriation of the children that had died there. And it's taken some time, and that's finally starting to happen. There's some 200 children, young adults who have been buried at Carlisle. And the process of repatriating the remains is not an easy one. The Army actually pushed back on this and didn't allow it to happen initially. So with a lot of pressure from a lot of sides, they're finally able to start to remove some of the bodies to bring them home, basically. Yeah.
Wow.
I'll also point out that the records of the Carlisle Indian School, about 6,000 records, are online. They've all been digitized of the children who attended there. You can look at their grade reports. You can look at letters. You can look at news clippings if one of them got in the news for whatever reason, and information on exactly where they were from. And interesting to see. And many did have health problems. Some of the records that I've looked at in particular, you see references to the fragile health of some of the students as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's worth looking into.
And where would someone find those records, Angela?
They are on the site of Dickinson College. I think, I'm trying to think, I can't think right offhand. Maybe before we finish, I can pull it up. I do have it on one of my files here with the link. But they are online at Dickinson, is the college that houses them. But it's a separate file in and of itself, and it's really interesting to see. And these are color scanned images of the records. School records, academic records, admission records. So it's good to see that.
All right. Any other before we move on to talk about the next episode, anything you all have been feeling about this last few days and the implications it might have for genealogy, what we could do as a community to kind of steer some of the conversation? Do you feel like our community has been vocal enough?
I'll say something about that. Only because, I mean, I appreciate hearing from a lot of people, but I think that we need to really speak. We know that, you know, we come from different walks of life. We understand that. We know those of us who voted for the current head of state, many of those let it be known. But my question is now, where are you? Many of them were, you know, insistent upon, oh, let's give them a chance. Although I don't think that many have necessarily said enough. Many want to say, oh, I'm not like that. I'm not a person who's biased. I don't see color.
They turn it
right,
to be about them.
But I would like to know, where are those who have said nothing? And I mean the leaders in the genealogy community. I mean those who are presidents of everything from NGS to AGS, who are lifelong members. I mean the leaders, the people to whom we look up to. Right now, I looked at the comments in the last 48 hours of some of the well-known, respected leaders. What do I see? Cat dog, a wet puppy dog, different things. It's as simple. You truly gonna, and if that is so, then I have to ask them, are you really the leader that I want to follow when staring us right in our face, right in the eye?
Anyone else want to chime in?
Well, I was asked to actually, I'm going to be writing something on on the statue, the only Confederate statue here in D.C. For Albert Pike, which is interesting because he has some very deep Masonic history with him. But in general, I would just say I think it's really, oh yeah, definitely, no doubt. The thing that I would say is, to me, it's also like the chickens coming home to roost in a way with a lot of this stuff. And to me, that like just like Angela was alluding to, is, you know, with all these things have been bubbling for so long, now it's in the streets, now it's in open, but these are things we've talked about for so long. You know, I think the thing that's more insulting to me personally. It's not so much the statues and all these other things, but the fact that, you know, now you have a Twitter account out there where they're going through these pictures and showing this person at the white supremacist rally is a professor. This one is a loan officer. This one is a banker. This one is I mean, you're seeing these are not your stereotypical, you know, Nazi waving, you know, flag waving people all the time. These are people who live in community with some of us. And you may or may not know that they're going to these type of rallies and things. I understand that there's a lot of emotion behind history, and there should be. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, I think that it's important to have a two-way dialogue, not just a one-way, dictation. Because that's what American history has been for so long. It's just been a one-way conversation. Now that it's two-way, or hopefully it can become a two-way conversation, and you know, things can be put in their proper perspective. So we'll see.
I was going to say, this is so personal to me in that this past weekend, I thought I could just start writing my next blog post, which is my third one on Madagascar with my 5 family lines going back to colonial Virginia. And General Robert E. Lee is the younger brother of my 4th great grandfather. So imagine how I feel where I'm seeing all these people celebrating a man whose family enslaved my ancestors and whose family is my family, right? We can't choose our ancestors. But to know that the man who was the major investor in the Virginia to Madagascar slave trade was my 8th great grandfather who mutilated his slaves and bragged about it. I have so many Carter paper documents where they tell what they did to, could be my ancestors, but it was definitely to Black people, right? And so I sit there and I have to weigh when you talk about, you know, writing, and last week some of us were on the Hail Chat Twitter group where you're talking generational trauma and how these things are played out historically and cyclical. And it's just, this is just a repeat of what our ancestors have gone before. I told someone today, I sometimes imagine how my ancestors felt right after Reconstruction when Jim Crow 1.0 was coming in. And you wonder sometime, how could you have, after the Civil War, such a period where we had so much hope, and then Jim Crow comes in. And then within 8 months this year, we're seeing a similar history taking place. And today, the double, triple, quadruple down that this president did, it's stunning.
Well, I'm going to also,
like Angela, you know, where are our leaders? Not just genealogical, but
I mean, that to me, I think it's a valid question that she asked about our community, because, you know, so many folks tout themselves as being diverse and, you know, oh, we want everybody to participate, blah, 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 blah. But their silence is deafening on this issue. When during the political season, they were very, very vocal and very active and, you know, made sure that their points of view were stated. And so, you know, I want to share something with you all. This report is going to actually be mentioned quite a bit. I'll post a link in the chat for those of you who are interested. But this is a report that was done by the Southern Poverty Law Center about Confederate statues across the United States. Yeah. And what it talks about are the top 10 states that have the most, you know, dedications to the Confederacy. Virginia leads every state by a mile. Right. Then you've got Texas, followed by Georgia, North Carolina, Mississippi, South Carolina, Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Florida. And just between the people that are on this chat tonight, I sit in Tennessee. Ellen is in Florida. Virginia, that's Shelley. And the other thing I'd like to also remind you all of is, I don't know if you've been watching Twitter, but the governor of North Carolina said that all of theirs are coming down.
Yeah,
he emphatically stated that after what happened this past weekend. So that means that 140 of these are going to be removed at some point. If you scroll through the rest of this, it talks about the geographic distribution of these particular statues. It says that for schools, 91% of them are in a Confederate state. When it comes to monuments on courthouse grounds, 95% of them are at a Confederate state. Or other location, 89% of them are in a Confederate state. You go further, and it also breaks it down. This is a very good report of 10 military bases that are named after Confederate military leaders.
Wow.
It also talks about 9 official Confederate holidays or observances, and or there are 9 official Confederate holidays or observances in 6 southern states. And that there have been at least 100 attempts at state and local levels to remove or publicly alter supported symbols of the Confederacy. I'm going to roll down because there's another part of this that's very important.
I've been there, Stone Mountain.
Yeah, Stone Mountain in Georgia. A lot of us have probably been there. But I want to point out this chart because it's being circulated on Twitter, and I want to make sure that the Southern Poverty Law Center gets credit for this. This is a timeline that talks about when the statues were erected.
Yeah.
And if you look, it is not during the war. In fact, it's not even during Reconstruction. There's a spike after the NAACP was founded.
Yeah.
And this is something as a community that I feel we have a super opportunity to change the narrative, to guide people in this conversation, because there's a lot of erroneous information that is going out about when the statues were erected and blah, blah, blah. Something else that I saw someone else mention online that I thought was very poignant is people are saying, well, when Robert E. Lee, when he, in his older years, he denounced everything and blah, blah, blah. See, I could take that if you showed the man in the wheelchair who was helping a Black person. Yeah. But every image of this man is when he's in battle and he's in military regalia. So that's not who you're portraying by this statue. It'd be a different story if they told the story of how he evolved with this. No, that's not happening. And I also, final point I'm going to make about this is last week I shared a video of me standing on the land my ancestors were enslaved on. One of the slaveholders that my ancestors had was the niece of Andrew Jackson. And he was so low down, in the words of my mother, that not only did his family own my family on my mom's side, but they drove out my ancestors on my dad's side through the Trail of Tears. Wow. So explain to me how you reckon this. But I just bring that up to say that this is not an open and shut case.
No, it's a good point that you share. And I think one of the things you've got to understand, apologists and revisionists are not new. I can't remember what year it was from 1998, maybe 99, when the Civil War Monument for the African American Civil War Monument in Washington, D.C. was built. I was there for the opening ceremony and for a number of things. Suddenly, the press, hey, look at all these Black men who are finally being honored in Washington. Beautiful monument. Suddenly was created. The myth of the Black Confederate soldier. Oh, hundreds of thousands of Black men fought for the South. Really? Why can you not find one statue reflecting a person of color? Because, again, here was something that we were doing for ourselves, very much like 1909 after the Niagara movement. Suddenly, there is now, people taking ownership of their history and sharing historical data. Some guy out of Texas has some integrated Confederate unit integrated out of Texas that he's invented. Another guy took a group of soldiers who were U.S. colored troops who were organized in Philadelphia, altered it, said that their light blue uniforms were really gray and that these were soldiers fighting for the South. Well, they were outed by people who discovered how they altered the photograph. But this is the sort of thing, revisionism is not new, but this is why it's so critical for us to be aware of our history and aware of those facts.
Right.
Because people, you hear it enough times. I mean, look, a lot of things are happening now because people lost their minds. 9 years ago when an African American was elected president? They have been going crazy ever since. And we're still seeing the madness. And, revisionism is not new. And
one thing I'll say. One thing I'll say on that too is that I am actually happy that these folks were honest on Saturday about, when they say alt-right, they're saying, they're basically, for white civilization and all that type of stuff. And that they didn't pull that whole Southern pride nonsense, because to me, that was always an insult, because I always go, well, Southern pride. I mean, all four of my grandparents are from the South. Two of them are from Southern Alabama, which you can't get much any further than South. Any further south than that, you're in the water from where my mom's side is from. So I'm happy that they didn't insult our intelligence in that way. But this is some real stuff, and this is the politics of history at work in the present. I just think it's important that we remember that we haven't. It's important that we remember that we have been through these type of things before. Oh yeah. And just like you survived it in the past, you'll survive it now. But the best thing to do is to remember those strategies that help you survive. So that's my advice.
I think this is prime time that we need to push out those stories about our connections to this time period.
Definitely.
And not so much. And I'm talking about the really intricate things that only a good researcher can pull out and humanize. I don't know if you all saw earlier today, I was sifting through the documents that I had, and I did the equivalent or the adjusted for inflation value of my ancestors, whose interest was sold to another family member. And the terms of the selling of this interest is 1/3 interest in my ancestors helped to pay for the law school education of the descendant of the slaveholder.
Right.
And then when I noticed that he was in law school, on a census 2 times later, and the fact that my ancestors' value was close to what I paid for my education. Those are the stories, and like I said, in the intricacies that people are going to read over when they're just trying to find a name and confirm a last slaveholder. That we, as people who are steeped in this, who are educated in this, who are teaching others and imparting to others how to tell these stories, we need to share that information, because the more we just put King was worth $900, we don't. You know what I'm saying? We're not doing justice to what that is. And so, you got to remember, Google has an algorithm for a reason. It loves blogs.
And that's why I think we're all here doing what we're doing. We're not going to let anybody revise. We're going to tell our stories, because we've already been left out the narrative for so long.
That's right.
We've been left out the books. Yes.
Right. I want to just mention something, and I don't know if you all can see this.
Oh,
this book is for the price for their pound of flesh.
Great book.
Look for the show in September, because we're going to talk about this and what it really means. And I think you're right. We need to start telling our stories, getting as many people as possible to start writing and telling their stories, because you have a whole group of people that have a narrative that's totally different from our narrative.
Right.
And I sure ain't gonna let you tell Granddaddy Ike's story. That's for sure.
I was about to say, when I shared earlier, when I was looking at the values and I saw, because explain to me how this family did not benefit from that descendant getting that law school education paid for.
Yes.
As a result of my family. Right. Now, I'm thankful that they didn't break them up, because they sure could have sold them apart.
Sure.
But on the same note, how grateful am I when I realized that potentially could have changed the trajectory of that family, and the value that was assigned could have been passed down to me generationally if you didn't work off of their backs and not pay them.
Yes.
So I raise this issue because people get real queasy and real uneasy when you start talking about reparations and what that means and why that's applicable. And why that discussion is a worthy discussion to have. Not so much handing out checks to people, but really taking a critical eye and looking at how factions of our society have benefited on the backs of poor or enslaved people. And that's why I just keep reiterating to everybody that's watching, those of you that are out there who might be scared to tell these stories, who may not think you have the mouthpiece, or that you have the platform to share it, or maybe you're scared, because you got to think there's some amount of fear attached to this as well, because we don't know if people were lynched and the families were driven out. We don't know if we got a situation like on Queen Sugar, where the former slaveholder own the land and the family came back and bought the land, and now there's a challenge with that, or that people, how many stories do we all have of folks whose land was stolen from underneath them because of quote unquote back taxes? You know what I'm saying? So this is the time for us to be brave and for us to illuminate those things. And if you've got receipts, we are the kings and queens of receipts in this group. We don't ever put anything out that is not found in where you can't go back and research. That's one thing I can say about BlackProGen Live. We don't ever put anything out where the receipts can't be scanned back in and you get a savings catcher on it.
With a finder's fee.
Shout out to the Walmart app.
There's a finder's fee surcharge. I want to make sure I threw that in there.
Yes, sir. So I just really wanted us to, I really hope that we empowered somebody to just take that leap. And especially maybe you have a blog that you haven't written on in a while and you're like, nobody's paying attention to me. Make sure that you hashtag us or tag us so we can support you in telling your story. How do you think we all got together in this nice little group? We had to begin advocacy and support somewhere, right? So it's past time for us to be doing this, you all. There are too many of us in this community for us to hoard all this information in this book and all those years that we spent in a courthouse and working late on computers. And how do you think I learned about the history of slavery in Puerto Rico? I had to, I read what Ellen wrote. I spoke to Ellen and she educated me on that. Say what you feel is just like, can you explain to me the difference between who is Nika Smith and Breitbart? We both pay hosting fees. They have higher traffic. They drive their narrative. I drive mine. And find the lie, please.
Yep.
Yes.
So, anywho, I just had to say that because I just could not let that I couldn't go without that being said. If you're in the chat room, be sure to check out the link that I sent for that amazing case study that was done by the Southern Poverty Law Center. I think you'd be remiss if you didn't read through it, just so you're educated when the narrative keeps getting thrust down our keep pushed in front of us and you feel something's not right. That's a great place to challenge somebody because it's scholarly research that has a methodology presented and all that kind of stuff that's there. So anywho, all right. So before we wrap up, I just want to remind everybody we've got more shows coming up. I want to say, I think I told Miss Angela we have like 9 shows left for the year. Can you believe it? Yeah. Wow. It's crazy. We're almost done. But our next episode is going to be Tuesday, August 27th, 2017. We're going to be talking about people of color in Iowa, Kansas, Minnesota, and Missouri. And I love Kansas. Kansas is the bomb. I can sit around and talk about Kansas for the entire episode, especially after this year. I love Kansas. So don't forget to tune in, same time, same bat channel, for Tuesday, August 22nd. We're going to be talking about people of color in Iowa, Kansas, and Minnesota, and Missouri. Also, we've got some additional content we want you to be aware about. We've got August 17th this Thursday, 6 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. Research at the National Archives and Beyond with Blog Talk Radio with Bernice Bennett. This week's guests are Wendy Wilson Fall and our own Teresa Vega talking about Malagasy roots. The African Roots podcast was actually produced last week, so be sure to go to africanrootspodcast.com for the August 11th iteration of that show or that podcast. And our own True Lewis was on this week's Mondays with Mert. So be sure to go back for that recording and check that out to see that. Our friend Dear Myrtle is with us on her YouTube Live on Mondays with Mert and Wacky Wednesday. Don't forget as well, sign up for the Lowdown. Get the latest and greatest from BlackProGen in your inbox. Subscribe to the Lowdown today. Check the description of this recording and any BlackProGen Live episode for the link. And maybe we said something provocative and you can't stand it, or maybe you love everything we said, or maybe you have a suggestion. We're taking topics for 2018. I'm actually waiting to hear back from the panel for their suggestions. I'm giving them another 2 weeks, and then I'm going to throw it out to the general public. But since you joined us tonight for BlackProGen Live, I'm going to ask in the comments section for you to put down topics you think we should cover in 2018. We're developing our schedule. You're like, it's August. Yeah, we do this well ahead of time, so we have our research ducks in a row, all sorts of stuff. So if you have suggestions for 2018, be sure to tweet us or hashtag your suggestions with BlackProGen. You can also comment at the bottom of this video with your suggestions, and as well, you can comment about the content of the episode. Maybe there was something we forgot to tell Kim Morton about York County, South Carolina. Maybe you're related to Kim. Maybe you're like, shut up talking about statues. Whatever. Put it in there. May get approved, it may not. I'm kidding. It really all depends on the subject matter. Anything else before we close out for the evening, you all?
I just want to say publicly, True Lewis is the bomb. She sent me my third great grandfather's death certificate, and the funeral home, I contacted them, and they was like, we don't have no records going before 1936. And then I said, well, check again, and they checked again and found him. And now I just got to go out there in them trees and try to find his grave site. So, True, I love you, and I want to say that publicly. Thank you.
I love you back, bruh. Anytime. You know it. I was so glad to get that. Oh, that was, yeah.
And she said it with authority, too. She said, we don't have nothing before 1936, but I'll look again in the basement. And sure enough, she found it.
Yeah, you got to be stern with them. They got stuff in the back room there, and the church secretary, she knows it all before they will. So,
Right.
Oh my gosh! You see
down there in Clayton.
you see how the two people came together and made sure that they got that document right.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
cannot operate on an island by yourself. If you do, you might have some personality flaws you need to work out. But
Well,
Hey, we just threw it in the pile.
but if you're doing it right, this is how it works. So I just want to, gosh, we're getting suggestions in the chat room. Genealogy Jim wants to talk about food and the culture, connection to culture. We were working on trying to get Michael Twitty on. Maybe if enough people tweet him.
Yeah, can
I'll-
you keep
I'll
on telling him?
Yeah,
telling
maybe if
him.
you guys like connect with him and be like, hey, we're trying to have you on so we can talk about greens and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, we see some suggestions. People are making comments. Kim Allen actually chimed in. She said each and every one of the panelists have a unique story. These stories may be similar but still unique. It's time for those stories to be told. The truth is needed at this time. Absolutely.
I just had an idea. If we have Michael Twitty on, we should all have like a soul food dinner while we're online. Like we should all like everybody have a different dish or something. That'd be hot.
Then everybody will be muted because everybody will be chowing down.
I know. It'd be a whole bunch of black cameras. Like literally everybody would spend the entire episode like this. Be completely off, and then they come back on camera and stuff. Because that would actually be fun if we took the recipes in the book and attempted to make it before we went on and actually ate our whatever we're eating. So it's almost like virtual dinner. That sounds like fun.
That would be one heck of a. Let me tell you something. That would be one heck of a Ask Mariah. Like, ask Mariah. Why couldn't my auntie Cynthia cook? Like, why could like we won't be able to answer that question.
I was about to say my Aunt Gail could not. One of her staples was she would order Little Caesars pizza. She would just get like cheese pizza, but then she tried to jazz it up with other stuff, and sometimes the other stuff would not be like what you're supposed to put on a pizza. And I remember my dad was the most horrible people to Aunt Gail about cooking because she would make these old concoctions, and I'd be all nice. I'd be like, and my dad would be like, Gail, we ain't eating this. And he would just go off. And I'd be like, Daddy, that is not nice.
Wow.
Wow. But that was my dad. So, anywho, thank you all for staying with us tonight. You guys are awesome. Don't forget to join us on Tuesday, August 22nd. We're going to be talking about Iowa, Kansas, Minnesota, and Missouri. People of color genealogy research. We love you all. Take care. Be safe this weekend.
Bye.
As I mentioned earlier, get that SPLC hate map. Find out where the people are near you.
Thank you.
Exactly.
I just had to say that. Find out where they at. You know where the pedophiles are, but do you know where the hate groups are? Just had to put that out there. All right, y'all. Good evening.
Good evening, everybody.